Well, self-control, self-regulation, this is not just one more thing. This is the key to everything in the self. So I thought, I better learn. There were people who are trying to quit smoking and lose weight by dieting. They do a bad job at both, and they're also really unpleasant to live with. It really looked to me like there was a limited ability to do this, even a limited energy, as the term willpower supplies.
Welcome to the Performance Initiative Podcast.
Our goal is to provide you and ourselves with the tools to be the best versions of ourselves.
We are your hosts, Dr. Grant Cooper
and Dr. Zinovy Meyler. We just wrapped up a conversation with Professor Roy Baumeister, and in this conversation, we really dove into many questions, such as, does self-esteem lead to happiness, better productivity, or neither?
Does self-control in children predict how much they're going to make in their future jobs?
Can you condition yourself to have better self-control?
What time of day should you ask your boss for a raise?
Is a snack before a test going to lead to a better grade?
Should you reschedule the SATs if you have a cold?
And many other questions.
And there's no one better to talk about all of these things than Roy Baumeister. Now, Roy is one of the world's most prolific and influential psychologists. He's published over 700 scientific works, including over 40 books. In 2013, he received the highest award given by the Association for Psychological Science, the William James Fellow Award, in recognition of his lifetime achievements. He's worked at multiple universities as of 2023. He's holding affiliations with Harvard University, Constructor University Bremen in Germany, Florida State University, and others. Roy is just a giant in the field of social psychology, and he was a delight to talk with. I'm sure everyone's going to have lots of takeaways from this conversation.
Absolutely.
Enjoy. Roy, thank you for taking the time to have this conversation. You're one of the most prolific and pioneering psychologists in the world today. We really enjoyed reading your books, and there are so many topics that we could obviously get into. We were hoping to focus on self-esteem and willpower. And when it comes to self-esteem, it makes intuitive sense to us as we think about it that if you were to have, if you were to feel good about yourself, that might have all kinds of positive ramifications. And in fact, it turns out that having a higher self-esteem is correlated with, maybe causative of, a greater sense of well-being.
Right. And so our question then, to begin, is, does it just lead to happier thoughts and feeling good about yourself, or does it lead to better productivity and eventual success?
There's the problem of things that are correlated aren't necessarily causal. If you have a highly successful time and produce a lot and everyone loves you, you probably have high self-esteem. But did the self-esteem cause that, or is it a result? And it's very likely, to some extent at least, the result. I remember reading some early studies, because I was on the self-esteem bandwagon quite early, even when I was in college doing my senior thesis with Joel Cooper. So I believed in it, but I found some that tracked people over time. And so looking at students' grades, for example, the grades they had in 10th grade predicted their self-esteem the next year. But the self-esteem in 10th grade didn't predict their grades the next year. So it looks like self-esteem is more a result than a cause. Now, the tie-in with feeling good is probably stronger. When things boost your self-esteem, you generally have an immediate good feeling about it. You have a big success at something, or somebody, tells you they like the way you're dressed or whatever. And conversely, something that lowers your self-esteem, you find out you're not as good as you thought, you have a big failure, somebody tells you look like hell. These generally feel bad. So I'm more inclined to accept a causal link there. There's been, since we published, I changed in my career from being an advocate of self-esteem to thinking, it's really not delivering the goods the way we thought. And other people more invested have tried to establish things. There was a real thorough one a few years ago that tracked people across time, but it only predicted the subjective things, not the objective. So having high self-esteem predicted later that you would be more satisfied with your salary. Okay, that's the subjective. You feel good about it, but it didn't predict getting a higher salary, just being more happy
You
with
feel
it.
good about it. Yeah.
And that's useful. That's valuable in life, but it's not the same as saying if we boost self-esteem that people will actually do better. That's been something. I mean, we know in American education, there's been a long quest for how to make kids learn better and perform better without having to do all that homework. Wouldn't it be nice with math that if you could skip doing the problems, if you just believe that you're good at math, wouldn't that actually make you better? But again, when you track people across time, it doesn't look like self-esteem leads to doing better, just to thinking that you're doing better. I remember early when self-esteem started to be in question, or it was even before that, there was an international competition of students on all their how much they'd learned. I forget which particular topics, usually math and English. And that was before the self-esteem movement had spread around the world. So the U.S. had a secret weapon because our schools were boosting kids' self-esteem, and in Europe and Asia they weren't bothered doing with that. Well, our students actually didn't perform very well. The secret weapon didn't really help us outperform students in other places. But the study also included having kids rate how well they performed, and on that, the Americans' kids got the highest score. So they believed they were the best
Let's go America.
performing, but they didn't actually perform any better. And I only know of the one really rigorous experimental test that was done. Don Forsyth wrote. I heard him present it at a conference, and I was telling him how profound it was, and he later got me to help write it up and publish it. But it was really all his work. He took the kids in his intro class, the university students, and all the ones who had C, D, or F on the midterm, he sent them weekly messages. Some was just a review question, some was a review question plus a boost to their self-esteem, and the third was the review questions. Everybody got a review question, but they also got a stern message to take responsibility and be the captain of your own fate. And then he saw how they did on the final. So that was randomly assigned, which is so rare in that research. Well, the kids who got the self-esteem boost, their grades actually went down on the final exam. So boosting self-esteem was not helpful. In fact, it was counterproductive, if anything. Maybe it made them think, well, I'm too good to have to bother with studying hard all this this stuff. And so,
Can we ask a question about that one in particular?
yeah.
Does that really boost, like the question we had about that study was by giving them messages telling them that they had a higher, that they should feel good about themselves, keep your head up. Does that actually boost self-esteem? Was that tracked? Because
Yeah,
there's
that's a
there's
good question. I'd have to go back and look at what they actually did. He tried very hard to to do the best they could with it.
Sure.
Um, and
It seems like if you just it's sort of like we're taught to not just tell kids you're the best, right? But rather because they
right,
won't believe it. And even if
right.
they did believe it, it would be more of a house of cards maybe, because they hadn't really earned it.
Well, there is that too. It hasn't stopped people from trying.
Yeah.
Um, but let me see they had any if they had a manipulation check there. I've forgotten the details of the study. It was
That's
published.
okay. It just seemed like even if it seemed hard to swallow the idea that you tell someone you're doing great, and even when the evidence is they're not doing great.
Well, they weren't
To
told
me, it's
they were doing
really
great. They were told things like, here he has an example, like
like keep your head up.
they said past research suggests that when students get back their tests, they tend to lose confidence. They say things like, I can't do this, or I'm worthless, or I'm not as good as other people in college. Other studies suggest, though, that students who have high self-esteem not only get better grades, but they remain self-confident and assured. Bottom line, hold your head and your self-esteem high.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, that's what he would say to them. Yeah.
yeah, so it wasn't
There was
disputing
this.
that they had done a bad job on the
Right.
midterm, but it's
Right.
saying
Right. Right.
to try to it. Let me see if
I mean, it came up to us a little bit because there was a Navy SEAL, Tom Shea, that we spoke with, and he tries to help people have a better sense of self and, become better versions of themselves, essentially. And he starts with the premise that in order to do that, you have to be able, like, the foundational thing of that is you have to be able to keep a promise to yourself. And if you just tell yourself, you're great or whatever, that you won't really believe it. But if you can actually, make a promise to yourself and keep it, then you start to build that
Yeah.
self-esteem, that self-confidence, and that without this, so that's why it was.
Yeah, we were just looking at the
I was just
we're
looking at
just
the
looking at the
manuscript
book.
itself, and they did have a manipulation check, and their self-esteem did go up. They rated
It
themselves
did go up.
more favorably. Now, you can even question that because they've been getting these messages, and are they really sinking in, or are you just saying what you think you're supposed to say?
Right.
That's a harder one to untangle, but at least it looks like it did have some effect in bolstering their self-esteem,
The self-esteem.
as far as it goes.
Yeah.
Bolstering as far as they would report it, and I guess the question whether it tracked, because we were looking at the term self-esteem that's been thrown around, and just to think of it conversely as the definition of esteem as being respect or admiration. Whenever we think of somebody else, how do we get their respect and admiration? We think we need to earn it. And so in that fact of what Grant was saying is that as you earn your self-respect, it grounds more, and maybe that's what the difference is between being told versus earning it.
Yeah, well, there has been something of a cultural change. There is the belief now, much more common than when I was young, that everyone is entitled to respect and to be treated favorably, and so that self-esteem doesn't have to be earned. I would speculatively link it to some of the changes in gender politics, because remember, traditionally, the man had to earn respect, but a woman was entitled to it. And just by virtue of growing up from a girl and becoming a woman, she was entitled to respect. She could lose it if she did something really bad, but she expected to have respect. And certainly I, as a boy, was taught automatically to respect women. We're supposed to respect our elders in general, but we knew as boys we had to prove ourselves, and we had to earn it. I think when the women moved into the work sphere, the male-created work sphere, I think they were sort of shocked by the male culture, which was a lot of put-downs. But that's what worked with men. There was never enough respect to go around, and that motivated them to try hard to prove yourself and earn status. I think it was stressful for the men who had to go through it, but it did get good results in terms of improving society. But and then the women came in, and the men would just pick on them the way they picked on each other, and the women thought that was outrageous, and reformed the organizations. So the idea that everyone's entitled to respect, we can give women the credit for that. Again, I'm speculating here.
Yeah, that's
Right.
interesting. I've never
Very
thought of that. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
sort of like the credit and the blame,
Yes,
right? From that, in a sense.
yes. But it has perhaps weakened the notion of respect as something that you have to earn, and
Yeah.
so people,
Although it
including
may be that deep down we know that you do have to earn it, right? Like there's a superficial layer, maybe, and a more profound level.
there should be, and whether it's the same in men and women is something I don't know.
Yeah.
There's a much
Talk
longer
about a
history
hot
of
button topic.
having to
Yeah.
prove yourself. I had a book on gender some times ago, and I know other people who picked up some of those lines and done the work. And again, manhood is seen as much more precarious than womanhood. That a girl grows up and she's automatically a woman. And they say, well, what would it mean that you wouldn't be a woman anymore? And they say, oh, I don't know, maybe you go through a sex change operation or something. But that you wouldn't feel like a man anymore, it can be you lose your job and you don't feel you can support your family.
Yeah.
So manhood is something more that has to be earned, and that's at least traditional. And as we get away from that, the effects on young men and indeed on our society are a little hard to predict. Sometimes these things don't make much of a difference, but sometimes they do.
That's really profound. And I
Yeah.
guess it speaks also to the importance of roles and having your identity coming a lot from roles.
Yes.
There was an interesting paradox that we found with the self-esteem, which is high self-esteem leads to people being able to stay at a task more. And it also leads for them to be willing to step outside the box and take risks more. And, it seems like those things would lead to more tangible outcomes, like, to be actually have more success in life. But that hasn't played out.
Well, there will be both more successes and more failures if you take more chances. Uh,
Hmm. Right.
you
So maybe you have greater on both sides of
Yeah,
that divide.
which is often a case. And again, I don't want to get bogged down talking about men and women, but there's a lot more variation in men than in women on all kinds of things. I first heard this from my mother when she was a high school teacher. And I, like every junior high school kid, I said, "Who's smarter, the boys or the girls?" And she said, "Well, the girls tend to cluster in the middle, and the boys were more at the extremes." And it turns out that has continued to hold up even with modern research. She was just a smart young school teacher, but
That's really interesting.
that seems to be it. And there's much more variation in terms of what men do and how well they do. I say, a lot of the feminist complaints are from looking at the top of society and seeing men there. But I said, well, look at the bottom. Who's there? Who's in prison? Who's homeless? Who's
Right.
dying of drug addiction or whatever. So you see more males at both extremes. Now there isn't that much of a self-esteem difference between men and women, so that doesn't explain it. But the willingness to take risks is much more associated with male traits. Again, for better or for worse. You look at those TV shows where people are doing dumb things and risking getting hurt and stuff. You don't see a lot of young women
Right.
doing the real stupid things. It's the guys.
Friends, we hope you're finding value in the content. If you're enjoying what you're watching, please consider hitting the like button, help us with our YouTube algorithm, consider subscribing to the channel, and turn on the notification button to stay up to date with everything going on in the channel.
One more thing we were wondering is the correlation between self-esteem and confidence. And we were talking in the context of when you see before mixed martial arts fights, boxing fights, with the face-off, each fighter is trying to get into the other's head and shake their confidence. Is it also manipulating their self-esteem as well?
Well, confidence is almost a kind of self-esteem, and it might come down to how you would measure it. People with high self-esteem, well, they generally think they're more capable. It's basically thinking I'm going to be a success and that people are going to like me. I mean, most of self-esteem is those two things. There's a bit of morality and a bit of sort of physical attributes, which actually again goes back to I'll be capable and people will like me.
Right.
So if we think of self-esteem as a stable trait, then the boxers aren't really affecting each other's, deeply held beliefs about themselves. But there's also state self-esteem, and it does fluctuate. It doesn't fluctuate like people think from super high to super low. It fluctuates around your baseline. A person with high self-esteem can have lower self-esteem someday if something really went bad, or if you mess something up, or cause a disaster. But it doesn't fluctuate from 0 to 100. If your baseline self-esteem is 75, you may fluctuate between 65 and 85.
It's interesting that before a serious event, like a fight, I guess, before someone is faced with real consequences, they become much more realistic about themselves, right? Their self-esteem modulates so to calculating the
Yes.
risk.
Yes. I wondered how people, especially the evidence that people generally think they're better than they are, at least when they respond to questions on the researcher's survey, they just implausibly inflate how favorable they think of themselves. But there's some evidence from Golvitzer's work and others that, yeah, when people have to make a hard decision, they suddenly sober up, as it were, and become quite
Yeah.
realistic. And that avoids making a choice. I mean, if you overestimate your ability at math, you're going to sign up for a math class that's way too hard for you, and you're going to fail. Or in romance, you pick out a person to approach who's way too good for you because you think you're really just as good as they are. You'd be a perfect partner, and they think, "Get away from me, you troll." So there are costs to overestimating yourself, but it seems, yeah, when you have to make a tough choice, you are able to be realistic and serious, and then they seem to go right back to the positive distortions once the decision is made, because it feels better and it gives you a little more confidence. There may be self-fulfilling prophecy in helping you do better, but you want to pick the math class or the fighting opponent or the romantic partner to pursue who's at the right level for you, and then be confident that you can be successful at it, so you're not consumed with self-doubts and other sorts of things.
Okay.
It makes me wonder, I grappled with this in my last book on the self. How deep then does this favorable, this positive illusion that people always find, that how deep is that, since you can really get serious and know that something's too hard for you or is not right for you? How deep does that go? And it made me think that, again, a lot of self-concepts are aspirational. They're what you want to be. The average person doesn't think they're God or some super being, Superman. You just think you're a little bit better than you are. You ask people how smart they are. Well, they inflate their intelligence a little bit, but not that, confuse themselves with Albert Einstein. They just, it's a best case scenario. And that made me reflect that the most important, that maybe we have multiple concepts of self, and the most important one is how you want other people to see you. So the desired reputation is in practice the one that is your go-to. So when the researchers ask you, how good are you at these things, you present yourself as you want other people to see you. That's the automatic one. And if you tell them, we want you to be modest, as if you're, hanging out with your friends or whatever, we want you to be realistic, as if you're making a major decision. That's a little harder to do, but people can do those too. But I think the default, the one that comes up, is, how do I want other people to see me? And this gets at a key point about self-esteem. If we start with evolution, we did things that help us survive and reproduce. Thinking what you think of yourself is not all that important in terms of how well you'll fare in life. What other people think of you is much more important. And this is, again, that I got started on this track of thinking way back when, from my undergraduate into graduate school, influenced by a variety of people, that everyone was talking about your self-esteem as if that was the crucial thing. But I realized it matters more what other people think of you, because then they decide whether they're going to hire you or sleep with you or befriend you or kick you out of the group or whatever. And we are a very social species. It depends on what other people think of us. If nobody wants to work with you, you'll starve. And you certainly won't reproduce if other people don't like you. So privately, what you think of yourself, that has a little bit of effects here and there. Like you say, you're more willing to take chances. You have more confidence in being able to speak up when you think other people are saying something that's wrong. The self-esteem makes some difference like that. But what really matters is to get other people to perceive you favorably. If you perceive yourself as really good, but nobody else does, well, it's not going to do you much good. In fact, it'll probably backfire. But if you can convince other people to perceive you favorably, life goes in a much more positive direction. So that's, I think, the fundamental thing.
Right. Yeah, it's like so the self-esteem is like the carrot that's like you try and put it right in front of you as your aspiration. And then there's a little gap that you're aware of on some level.
Yes. Well, it's, as I called it, the desired reputation.
Right.
And, my professors were always talking about your private view of yourself and your pursuing this desired self-concept or not. And I think, well, as far as I could tell, it's really the public is what other people think of you that matters. Some of my early studies, we would give people bogus personality feedback. You have them take a test, and then you give them a result that says you did great, you're a wonderful person, or yeah, you have a lot of issues. We give them at random, so I could see how they react to it. And this had been done, and this was again what Professor Cooper taught me to do in my undergraduate thesis, and we did that. But what I started doing there was giving it either publicly or privately. So I give it in a sealed envelope, and it was completely anonymous. And here are the results of your test. That really didn't affect them very much. But in the other condition, it was in public. It was a printout. I brought it in like I'd been reading it, and it had their name on there. And oh, you're going to meet somebody else, and so it gets to know you. I'm giving it to him too, so he'll have some understanding of what you're like. Then it affected people a lot. It's the same information. It should have the same effect on your self-esteem. You took the same test, you gave the same responses, you got exactly the same feedback as to what kind of person you are. The only difference is it secret, confidential, nobody else will ever see it, or other people know about it? And that was a big difference. So the first 10 years of my career, I did a lot of stuff studying that sort of effect.
And the way it affected them is that their self-esteem comes down, or they felt bad, or how did it manifest?
Well, we did a variety of these studies. So we had how they rated themselves. If the other person knew about it, if we said like, "Oh, you're insecure," if they knew about it, oh, this other person's going to think I'm insecure. But they kind of went along with it and what they said to the other person, but they tried to make up for it by really upping how good they were on some traits that had nothing to do with insecurity. So that was one of the first projects. I forget, there were various behavioral things you can look at the effects on how well they perform on a task or whether they give up and try again. But again, it had a much more impact both on their feelings and their self-reports and on their behavior and how it even approached someone else, if it was public and if it was confidential.
Yeah. Amazing. Could we pivot to self-control and willpower?
Sure.
'Cause it seems like if you had one thing that you could change about yourself to make your life better and the lives of those around you better, then willpower and self-control would be right at the top of that list. It seems like a really good entry point to that, I think, is the Marshmallow study. And I wasn't sure how commonly known the Marshmallow study was, because if you ever take an intro to psych, that's one of the first ones that you'll hear about. But I took an informal poll, and it seemed like about half the people did, half didn't. So could you describe the Marshmallow study and why that was so important?
Sure. This was the great Walter Mischel came up with this way back in the 60s. And the idea was to use self-control to get a larger reward that's delayed. Because often in life, you have a choice between doing what's best for you right now or doing what will yield benefits in the long run. You know, a kid, you're going to go sit down and do your math homework, or you're going to go outside and play. It'll be more fun to play, but in the long run, you'll be better off doing your math homework. So he set up this situation where he asked the kid what's their favorite treat, either a cookie or a marshmallow or whatever. Somebody else later called it the marshmallow test. So say the kid picks, oh, my favorite treat is a marshmallow. So the experimenter says, okay, well, I'm going to give you this marshmallow. You can eat this, but I have to go away for a few minutes. If you cannot eat it, just leave it there until I come back. Then you can have another. You can have 2 marshmallows. So it's doubled the reward just for managing to resist the temptation. Now, the way Walter Mischel explained this was kids, they naturally think when something's important, you focus your attention on it. But that's the worst thing to do. I'm sitting there with this marshmallow right in front of me, and if I look at it and look at it, that makes me want it all the more. And so then it's harder to do it. The kids had to learn to make it work by, closing their eyes or turning around, or some of them would sing la 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 la. There are a variety of funny videos of the kids coping with it, but it really worked for some of them to do it. And Walter made his career of studying the strategies people used. And he said, well, don't think of it as a marshmallow, think of it as a cloud. Or another, he had, instead of the marshmallow, he looked at a picture of the marshmallow. He did all these variations, but I think what really elevated this in the public discourse was years later, he followed up the people who had been in this experiment after they had grown up to see how they were doing in life. He said he got the clue. He was at Stanford, and Stanford had a particular elementary school for their people who worked there. And so his kids went there too, and he ran the experiment there. And then he would hear later from his kids that, oh, so-and-so won a prize, or so-and-so got in big trouble today, or whatever. And Walter said, I couldn't resist. I would go back and kind of look up what they'd done in the experiment. And the kids who were getting into trouble and messing up and so on were the ones who had just gobbled down the marshmallow rather than waiting the 10 minutes to get the increased reward. Meanwhile, the kids who had waited the longest, they were often doing well. So he finally, about the time they were all in college, he went and mailed them a questionnaire, and he did another one later on too. And sure enough, the kids who had done better at age 4, this was a preschool, kindergarten, at age 4 had done better at delaying gratification of taking the big reward, but restraining their appetite in the moment. They were doing better. They had higher SAT scores on their college entrance exams. They were more popular. So it wasn't just hard work and so on. The other kids liked them better. The teachers rated them more favorably. And so there were all sorts of benefits. Later on, they were earning higher salaries. So it suggests a number of things. One, that self-control is already on a path early in life. I don't think we can quite say that what was in their mind at age 4 was predicting what their salary would be when they were 35. It's not that direct. But, most personality traits have some genetic aspect and some learned aspect, and the learned is partly installed by your parents. So they had the same genes, obviously, but maybe they continued to be influenced by the same parents, and parents who encourage good self-control, that would continue past age 4 and into high school, and help them become more successful that way. And the parental environments that don't do that as much, they would probably continue in that. I don't know the Stanford community back in the 1960s. There probably weren't a lot of single parents, but that's come up as an issue in our society as we've shifted toward more and more single parents. A book that really affected me was the General Theory of Crime by Gottfredson and Hershey. It was published about 1990. I thought, all right, that's a pretty bold title, A General Theory of Crime. You're going to explain everything. So, but it got my curiosity, obviously, so I bought the book to see what they did. And their general theory was low self-control, that criminals come primarily from low self-control. It stimulated a ton of research in criminology. And mostly backed it up. It's not the only thing. There are a few other things contributing to a criminal lifestyle, but low self-control is very prominent. It's an important one. And one line of evidence they took was the single parents. Most single parents are really trying to do a good job, but it takes enough energy to get the kids fed and off to school on time and take care of their problems. Maintaining a disciplined environment with strict rules and so on. That's something that it's useful to have a second parent to do that. Indeed, I guess there's just a recent book, The Two-Parent Privilege, which I haven't read, but reviewing all the same evidence that kids do better if they're brought up by multiple parents rather than by one, because it's just kind of too much of a job to do it all. So anyway, linking the low self-control from that kind of family environment, which again shows up everywhere from how well they do in school to whether they get arrested and sent to prison. The children of single parents have a rougher time of it.
Yeah. The self-control. I mean, it's such a huge effect. The ability to delay immediate gratification, have more self-control, and what you then went on to find out, to discover, is that we all have sort of a finite amount of energy for willpower and self-control. And I think the one that illustrates this to me maybe the best, and it also is nice because it shows how completely mean and merciless social psychologists can be with their experiments, is the chocolate chip and radish experiment, which lays the groundwork. Could you describe that one?
Yes. We were just starting to come up with these findings. As I said, I become disillusioned with self-esteem and was looking for other things. And self-control really does seem to do what self-esteem doesn't, which is contribute in a major way to all sorts of long-term success in life. And I'd set early in my career the goal I wanted to understand the self. And in the 80s, several of the leading thinkers were saying, well, self-control, self-regulation, this is not just one more thing. This is the key to everything in the self. So I thought, I better learn about that. And I read whatever I could for a couple of years and did get the impression that it was a limited capacity, that people couldn't do a lot of self-control things at the same time. I mean, to cite one paper, people who are trying to quit smoking and lose weight by dieting, they do a bad job at both. And they're also really unpleasant to live with because they're not controlling their emotions either. They're crabby and grumpy and all that. So it really looked to me like there was a limited ability to do this, even a limited energy, as the term willpower supplies. Now, you have to appreciate back then, around 1990, I used to joke energy models were so far out of fashion we weren't even against them anymore. That everything in psychology was the brain is like a computer, and this is when personal computers were spreading through the society, and so everything was about information processing, and the brain has different programs and so on. But that would predict the opposite effect. When your computer is already doing word processing and you open a new file, it starts right away. This was much more obvious back then than it is now because the computers have gotten faster. But the writing program is already up and running. And in the same way, if you had to do one self-control task and then another, well, your control module should be up and running, so you should do better in the second task. But when we put it to a test, it went the opposite way. After they performed self-control, they did worse on the second one. The radish experiment was, Diane Tice, my wife, was her idea for how to do it. And immediately when she said it, I thought, well, this will really get the message across to people. So obviously we can't tell people what they're studying about. This is an old thing in social psychology. If people know something about themselves is being studied, then they become very self-conscious of that, and that changes. So we couldn't tell them we're going to test your self-control because, they'd be all nervous there. So we told them it was a study on how well people could remember sensations of taste. And we're going to give them a bunch of things to taste and see if they can remember and recognize the taste. So it wasn't true, but it's necessary to sort of mislead people about it. And that also gave us the excuse. We told them, please don't eat anything for 3 hours before the experiment. So that meant, they skipped lunch or whatever. They arrived at the experiment and they're hungry. Then what we did, this is probably the mean part, was we baked chocolate chip cookies in the laboratory in a microwave oven, and you know how it blows out the delicious aroma which filled the laboratory. And we even had complaints from people across the hallways saying, I'm in my office trying to do my statistics and I'm smelling your dying cookies all day. So we know it was very tempting. Anyway, person comes over for our experiment. They're hungry, they skip lunch, and suddenly it smells really delicious. Now we seat them at a table with a tray of these cookies and a few other chocolates and things like that, and also a bowl of radishes. And for the crucial ones, we said, well, you're going to be in the radish condition. So what we need you to do is eat some of these radishes and don't touch the cookies. They're for other people in the experiment.
That's the mean part.
Yeah. Well, actually the idea again was we wanted them to have the desire for this, and then they have to control it, because self-control is basically altering your response, altering your psychological state. So just like in the Marshmallow study, they had to see the cookies and want them, but tell themselves no, plus make themselves eat some of those radishes. And many people say they like radishes, but usually not when your nose is full of chocolate chip cookie aroma. Really not satisfying. So we left them alone to basically use up some of their willpower, was the idea, for 5 minutes. Of course, we observed them secretly to make sure, and they longingly looked at the cookies and so on. And some people picked them up and sniffed them and put them back. Anyway, it did seem like they were tempted, but they all followed the instructions. Nobody bit into the forbidden food. We had two control groups. One that were told, don't eat the radishes, eat the cookies. This was not hard. That didn't take willpower. And then we had a no food control. But the ones who are interested in are the ones who had to sit there seeing and smelling and desiring the cookies, but instead had to resist that and make themselves eat those stupid radishes. And then after that, they went to a different room where there was no food. And we borrowed a procedure from stress research, which is how long do you keep trying before you give up? And they've done this in different ways. In the stress research, they've had rats see how long they can swim before they give up and drown. I don't think they do that kind of thing anymore. But rats used to be considered expendable. Anyway, we gave people puzzles to solve and told them to work on them until you get them or until you give up. And actually, they were unsolvable because it would mess up the experiment if they actually solved them. But we wanted to see, again, it's a use of self-control to make yourself try again, try another way to solve this puzzle. And sure enough, the people who had been in the radish condition, who had used up some of their willpower, resisting the temptation to eat the cookies and making themselves eat the radishes, they gave up much faster than the people in either of the other conditions. 5 minutes of resisting temptation, as I recall, took something like 10 minutes off of their perseverance of continuing to work. So it was quite a large effect for a laboratory study. It is a good one to do, and people want to do replications of the effect, and they always want to get the easiest, simplest things. I always say, well, use this one. This has really good effects, but it's too much trouble to get all the cookies in there and bake them and have a refrigerator for the radishes. You want to do it, but that was a nice, strong, robust effect.
Yeah, and then there's so much, the data that comes on the heels of that. It's so fun and it's so interesting because you see how time and time again you can manipulate using different, like the ones with the movies where you have people that watch a sad movie or a happy movie and they have to control their emotions.
Right. Yes.
That also plays out that way, right?
Yeah, we've used that both as the manipulation and as the measure, and it works both ways. You tell people, don't show any emotions in your face and try not to feel any emotion. So they're using self-control to operate on both their physical display and on their feelings. That depletes them, and so then they do worse. If we gave them the same measure of unsolvable puzzles, they'd quit faster. We could also use it to deplete them with something else, and then you have to film them and have people watch and see, is he laughing at the joke here, or is he maintaining the poker face? But as long as the judges don't know what condition they're in, it's perfectly valid way to do it. It's just it takes a lot of work to code all those, but it would
And
show the same effect.
and it becomes such an important thing to be aware of because like the thing I don't know if it was a study or just a finding that with car dealerships as just one
Yes.
example, they want to they can deplete your resources to answer they basically when you're finishing the purchase of a car, they'll ask you, or if they ask you about things that are not so critical, like what color do you want the carpet and things that are not very high value, then by the time you get to what engine would you like, you're much more likely to default to a higher priced, whatever
Right.
the standard is.
Yes, yes,
Go
yeah,
ahead. Yeah.
that's what they found. I think it was Jonathan Levov and several colleagues did this study where they got the Audi dealers to scramble the order of the questions that they asked when you're completing the purchase of a car. You got to decide about the color and fabric and all that, and also rust proofing and all those other things. And sure enough, they're more likely as they went along, whatever order it was, they're more likely to say, "I'll take whatever's standard, whatever the default is." They thought hard on the early ones, and then later they just didn't want to think as hard anymore, and it ends up boost. It turns out the Audi dealers already had something of a of an inkling
Of an idea on that.
this work. That's why they started you off with the 240 shades of interior fabric that you could use. And
Right.
you use up your willpower comparing them all and picking them, and then later you just go, yeah, whatever.
Right. And then famously, I think Obama read your book, and that's when he started to not pick out his own suits, right? He would say, okay, tan or gray, and these
All
are
right, I
foods
don't
that,
know if
and
he
he just,
actually read it. I imagine he had other things to do, but maybe somebody on his staff saw the New York Times did a big write-up on it, and it may have gotten in there too. But yeah, he said, I have a lot of decisions to make, and only the tough ones, because the easy ones get made lower down the chain of command.
right.
So only the real stumpers get kicked up to the president, and it's exhausting. So I don't want to waste my energy deciding what to wear or what to eat.
Yeah.
So he just
And
wore
it's a
the
smart strategy, right? It's a
yes,
smart strategy to take away as many of those kinds of,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I think actually most people have a pretty set routine in the morning for precisely the same reason. It's not exactly Obama making decisions that will affect the world, but you do the same things in the same order each morning because, in a sense, you're conserving your energy for the challenges of the day. You could get up and decide, well, should I take my shower first, or have breakfast first, or maybe have a little do some push-ups. And then what do I want to eat for breakfast? I
Right.
can really eat
Right.
anything I want. What do I really feel like? And you make all these
Yeah.
decisions.
You'd be exhausted by 10 o'clock.
Yeah, I think the Dilbert cartoon had a thing on this where they have they had a attractively dressed female employee come to Dilbert and say, "Aren't you embarrassed that you're wearing the same stupid outfit every day?" And he said, "Well, no, don't you know it uses up your energy to make all these different decisions? You look great, but I must have taken a lot of things." And she said, "Yeah, I made 75 fashion decisions before breakfast." He says, "I wrote an app before breakfast."
It's funny because I see my daughter, our middle daughter in the morning, really, she thinks about what she's gonna wear, and I realize like, oh, this is part of that. This is a bad strategy, right? It'd be better if she could pick it out the night before. So
That's what
one
we
less
used to
thing
do with
worry.
our daughter. My wife came around to that, partly because they kept changing their mind. And this is even when she was in an all-girls kindergarten. I mean,
Yeah.
if
Wow,
you
that's
assume you have
precocious.
the same male outlook I do, which, you want to look nice, mainly so
Right.
that you look nice to women. Who cares what, guys hardly even notice what you're wearing. But the girls really were intent on it. So I said, "No, we decide the night before, and there's no changing."
And that's a really good segue to what was surprising, I think, kind of counterintuitive in some ways, that people that you would rank high as someone who's, really has a lot of self-control, they don't actually have to exercise that self-control during the day.
Yes, that came up later after I'd been doing this work for a while, but it came up repeatedly. And one of the big changes was there were a couple studies that pointed me to that finding. One was the meta-analysis of trait self-control. We developed a questionnaire. Some people are chronically better at it than others. The depletion stuff is just a state that fluctuates, but some people again have a baseline where they're better than others. My co-authors were looking at all the published research using the scale, and so they're looking for moderators and say, well, is it automatic or controlled behavior? And they coded it, and the prediction was obvious. Self-control is about control, so it should have strong effects on controllable behaviors and not so much on the automatic. And yet it came out significant in the opposite direction, which totally flummoxed them. What are we going to do about this? This doesn't make any sense at all. Are we going to argue that automatic stuff is really controlled? And when I'm stumped, I always go back and try to look at the data and look at the methods and exactly what was done. And just go back and see exactly what all these things were. And they did that, and they came back, and that was the interesting finding. He said the automatic ones were really habits. And so what good self-control predicted was habits. So as example, self-control, your personality level of self-control, people associated with weight loss and dieting, and it had a little effect there, but that was kind of weak. It was a much stronger effect on studying and work there. And you think, well, what is self-control needed for there? Is it to make yourself stay up all night and get it done? No, it's having good work habits so that you get things done early, and then you don't have all the stress of having to stay up. We had another sort of thing with controlling. There was a study of as people went about their daily lives, did they have desires for this or that, and did they restrain their desires, or did they just indulge them? Again, it seemed like the obvious prediction was people with good self-control will be restraining their desires much more. But no, it was the opposite. They were doing it less. And we had to go back and try to figure out what happened. Well, they don't get themselves into the situations where there are problems. They, again, set their life up to work by habits so you don't have problems. If you're trying to quit drinking alcohol, you don't go into a bar with your friends saying, I'll just have a Diet Coke. And then you get in there and it smells good and the drinks look delicious and then you struggle to do it and eventually you give in. If you have good self-control, you just sort of have the habit, you don't even go inside. And so the way self-control works best is to break bad habits and form good habits, and then life runs very smoothly. It's sort of an automatic pilot, and you get what you want without having to struggle a lot. We had some research linking self-control to the glucose and the chemical in the bloodstream. That's kind of the fuel for the body, and it's just not plausible that some people have more fuel than others. Everybody has about the same level. So it's not that you have more willpower in that sense. You just use it more effectively and more proactively and intelligently. Like I said, break bad habits and form good ones, and then life runs smoothly.
Since you brought up the glucose, could you talk about the study that your grad students started? And I thought it was the one with the milkshake, and I forget what the other, like some yogurt concoction.
Yes.
It's such a great illustration of a couple of points, but go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. This is the first. This is Matt Galliot, is when I moved to Florida State, he's one of the first graduate students I had there. He came in the office one day and said, well, if resisting temptation makes you weaker, does indulging temptation make you stronger? And this is a crazy idea. I said, I didn't think it worked like that, but go ahead and try it. I said, we'd be really popular if it worked. We were calling it the Mardi Gras effect, the way you sort of have a big festival and celebrate and drink and dance and whatever to get ready for Lent. So supposedly improves your ability to resist temptation afterward. So we had a depletion manipulation. I forget exactly the one, what we used. So he did something to use up self-control, and then after a little while measured them on something else. In between, so they got the indulgence, which was they got to eat some ice cream, or there was no food where they just read some old boring technical magazines, Or in case there was any effect of food, we gave them something to eat that tasted bad. It was like unsweetened ice cream with some kind of bad flavor. It was this big dairy yuck thing, and they didn't like it. The ratings were they would rather read the boring magazines than eat this glop. So we set it up, and I forgot about it. I was running a big lab and busy with other things. And a month or two later, Matt came into the office. He said, "Well, I did the Mardi Gras study, and it didn't work. The students come in, and they're sort of looking at their shoes. They put in the effort to do this study, and I didn't get it." And so I said, "Oh, so the ice cream didn't restore their self-control." He said, "Well, actually, that did. It's just the problem was that the bad tasting food condition did it also." Obviously, it was not the pleasure of indulging your temptation that did it. So he was saying it was a failure. But I said, well, wait a minute, though. They both had food. We've been talking about willpower and energy as kind of a metaphor, but could it really be tied into the body's energy system? He thought that was an intriguing idea. And so then he went back to the library and again came back a month or two later, having read all kinds of nutrition research. Again, I'd sort of forgotten this because I was working on other things. But yes, the nutritionists had found all kinds of things the behavioral problems looking like bad self-control associated with low blood sugar, low blood glucose. So, some would look at juvenile diabetics. Might have issues like that, and they often, when they have low blood sugar, trouble making a decision or resisting anything. And then there were all sorts of experiments that they had done. My favorite, there's something you can do to put on a clamp that basically reduces the glucose in the person's body, and they had them work on a computer program that was very frustrating. And the measure was, did they actually hit the computer? and sure enough, the people with the low blood sugar were more likely to respond frustration by getting violent toward the computer. There are very nice studies in education that were done where they will tell the whole class, nobody have breakfast tomorrow, everybody come skip breakfast, and then they randomly assign half the kids to have breakfast and the others not. And sure enough, the kids who had breakfast, so they have glucose in the system, they learn better and they behave better than the kids who were in a low glucose deprived state. And then at 10:30, when everybody got a snack, all the differences disappeared and everybody was fine again. So it really looks like the low levels of glucose in the system make you less well functioning in self-control terms.
But there's the great study too where they gave lemonade, right? That was either lemonade.
Oh yeah, this
with
also my wife Diane came up with this procedure. We'd use the ice cream, but ice cream's kind of messy to work. It starts to melt, and you have to have a solid freezer and so on. So the ideal procedure was to mix lemonade. We were in Florida at the time, and it's hot. And so it's always nice to offer people a glass of lemonade. And you can mix the lemonade with sugar or with a diet sweetener like Splenda or Equal or whatever. It can be mixed in advance, so it's double blind. Neither the experimenter nor the research subject knows what kind of drink it is. They're just, oh, thank you for the drink. And they drink it. And of course, the sugar puts a big dose of glucose into your system, and the diet sweetener doesn't put anything into your system. And this has worked pretty much every time for us, that the sugar wipes out the depletion effect. Then their self-control is basically fine, even though they'd already expended some of their willpower on the first task. Whereas the diet sweetener, which they'll rate, tastes just as good and everything, but satisfies the thirst and all that, but it doesn't give you any more glucose. And so they continue to perform badly after if they were depleted.
Yeah.
So
have they looked at caffeine and other stimulants like nicotine or
yeah, we tried to get into caffeine a little bit later. It's more complicated, and I had a really bright student who was working with it, and then she sort of lost interest and went other things. It's tough to do. We think of caffeine as giving you more energy, but what the student who learned far more than I did, I knew about it, said, Um, Actually, what caffeine does is it wipes out the signal of tiredness. It does not really give you more energy. It
That's true.
bonds with the molecules. So when you process glucose in the brain, it creates some other chemicals. Um,
Yeah.
and
Well, I mean, the question anyway would be, I guess, is it energy or is it glucose? Right? Like those don't have to be the same things, I would imagine.
oh, yes, okay. Well, that if you could give some other energy, you can maybe give people an injection of adrenaline or something. That would be
Yeah, that would be extreme, but yeah,
interesting.
or nicotine, right? I mean, I think nicotine.
Oh, nicotine would
I
be
re-
another interesting one. Yeah, yeah. I think that is
Yeah.
actually a stimulant. Um, this is again, I'm a social psychologist, so already getting into the body stuff was a stretch for me. And then some of the real glucose experts got involved, and they taught us a bunch of things. We improved the theory, but
Yeah.
um,
It is
it's
fascinating how glucose is so important with your ability to, not have ego depletion. That was,
Well, to that point, it's a great distinction between a stimulant that makes you less tired and feel energetic, but it doesn't necessarily correlate with what you see with ego depletion, where someone has emotional liability and less self-control and would make poor choices.
yeah. I used to advise my students, if you're getting ready for their final exam, have a real Coke, not a Diet Coke.
right.
Because the original idea behind Coca-Cola was with the caffeine wipes away the tiredness, and then the
Yeah.
sugar gives you energy. Um, that's why when they started to do Diet Coke, they increased the caffeine since you're not really getting any new energy from it, but they want to make it more extreme in wiping out the effects of tiredness.
Is
So
that right? Is there still more caffeine in Diet Coke than Coke? Because that would
yes,
explain a lot.
yeah, I believe there is. You can look this up. It's actually fairly complicated. Coke Zero has lower
Yeah.
caffeine. It's a 35, I think, like regular Coke.
Okay.
But Diet Coke, it might be 40 something, even
That's so
48.
interesting.
I'm not sure. It's a considerably
Yeah.
stronger dose. So I'm on an airplane and I'm working. I always try to get a Coke Zero because I don't want to be, wound up that much.
Right.
It'll
So
last for a while.
titrate the caffeine.
But you can look up their cola drinks really do differ in how much caffeine they have. I think the Diet
Yes.
Cherry Coke is also a lower one.
Okay.
But go figure.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
either way, they
Either
manipulate
way,
the
yeah.
stimulus, going away from cocaine, but caffeine, loading up on caffeine.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Cocaine was the original recipe. It's
Right.
too bad. I guess I don't get that
That,
anymore, but
that
I
would probably be a hard study to run today.
can.
There's so many really provocative findings in this field. The one that really surprised me was you wrote in your book that people with a really bad cold, which of course will drop your glucose as you're using that energy to fight the cold, actually are more risky drivers than people who are mildly intoxicated. You remember that one?
Well, that's not one
That
of
was
mine. I vaguely
okay.
remember
That
that,
was somewhere, but
but
the
yeah,
idea that it can affect you that much, and they said, if you have a kid who's going to be taking the SATs and they have a really bad cold, actually reschedule it because
yes,
you won't have, and that I never really, I didn't realize that.
yes. It turns out a lot of scoring on intelligence tests is really self-control. This was sort of a pet issue. I was in a department where there were a number of intelligence researchers. Of course, intelligence is something psychology studied for over a century. It's probably the best measured psychological trait and all that. And I like to say psychology really only has found two traits that seem to improve your life in every sphere that they've been measured, one being intelligence and the other being self-control. So I start to tell my colleagues about these self-control findings, and the self-intelligence was the big brother, so to speak. And they say, well, you're probably just really measuring intelligence, don't you think? And I say, no, I don't think so. I mean, look at the
Right.
Radish study and these things. It's not an intelligence thing. And so then we got with some of my other people started looking at how well they do on intelligence tests after they're depleted. Have them do a depletion manipulation, just a self-control exercise. It has nothing to do with thinking hard or anything, but sure enough, it dropped their scores on intelligence. So whereas my colleague's initial reaction was, well, self-control, blah, blah, blah. You're probably really just doing intelligence. I could come back and say, yeah, actually, you guys, when you're studying intelligence, you're really studying self-control, at least a big part of it. It was interesting, too, what it affected. As intelligence tests have lots of different, subtests. And the automatic processes are not affected by depletion. For example, most intelligence tests have a vocabulary test because smart people know more words than others. And so, well, if you've just exerted self-control, and I bet also if you have a cold, your vocabulary is still intact. You still know the meaning of words. You can still answer those questions. Your score on that won't be affected, but the ones where you had to reason, where you're given some information and you have to think about it and analyze and deduce and infer and impute and come to a different point, those were the things that really suffered, the controlled processes. That's what seemed to get worse in terms of intellectual functioning when people are depleted.
So if you have a big decision to make, then you should really be careful not to make it when you're ego depleted, it sounds like.
Right, yeah, don't make the decisions at the end of the day. There's that old advice to sleep on it, which may have multiple benefits. It could be the unconscious works on it all night and helps sort things out, and that is a real effect too. But also to address it when you're fresh and you're not depleted, you're more able to sort through the information, decide what's relevant, what's not. People do those things better when they're fully energized. I even did a paper with a couple lawyers talking about mediation, getting people who are having some conflict together, and they said there's a long sort of informal history there about, do you not feed them for a long time and then feed them? Which started to make sense when we looked at it this way. You got to get them to air all their grievances and problems first, even when they're hungry. And then when you're ready to move on to a more compromise and so on, then take a break and have everybody have a meal so that your willpower is recharged, so to speak.
Yeah, those commercials for Snickers really satisfies you, is having a new ring to me. From back when I was a kid. There was a study that's in your book, and we were talking about it and how to implement what you can learn from it, and we actually got into a little bit of a debate about it. So I was hoping I could bring it up to you, and you could tell how we could think about it. So there's this study about if you're going for parole and you have a parole hearing, if you see the judge in the morning, when presumably the judge is rested and fed, you have a 65% chance of getting parole. And if you see the judge after lunch or after a snack break, you have about a 60% chance. But if you see the judge later in the day, when the judge is presumably tired and not fed, you only have a 10% chance. And this is with people that are randomized across that. These discrepancies shouldn't be there. And the takeaway that we had from that, we thought we were sort of on the same page with, but then we realized that maybe we're not. So for example, if you were going to go to your boss and you were going to ask for a raise, the question was, okay, so should you only do that when the boss is in the morning and in a good mood, or after lunch when the boss is well fed? And my take on it was not necessarily that. Basically, when the person was ego depleted, the boss was going to do whatever was the easiest shortcut where they don't have to think about it. So that if you're asking for a raise was that you really deserve the raise, the boss knows it. And so it's just easier for the boss to give in and say, yeah, sure, yes, you have the raise. But if the boss has to go to his boss or her boss and justify it, and the boss doesn't really think you deserve the raise, then the boss is going to say, no, just get out of here. You don't deserve it. Is that the way to think about it?
Yes. It's not that it makes you nicer. That was not the point of the judge's study. It makes you do what's the easier, the default. It's and not thinking as carefully or clearly. It's those of us, I assume you've never been at a parole hearing, nor have I.
There's got to be wood here somewhere.
But the judge's situation, the risk for them is to let someone out, give parole, and then the guy goes out and commits another crime. And it makes the judge look bad. So some people really have earned it, but that takes a bit more of a leap of faith. And as the day wears on and you get more tired, you're more, the easy way, the safe thing is just send them all back to prison. Request denied, parole denied. And so this also was Lvov, the same guy who did the study with the Audi dealers. They got these data from paroles, and the study's been a bit criticized. You can't be sure that people were randomly assigned. It's slightly possible that some of the easier cases came earlier in the day. It's very hard when you're dealing with real world data. I mean, that's why we love the laboratory. You have more control, but you need both. You want to see it happening out in the world as well. So you just graph along the course of the day. What is the probability that the person will get parole? And you're right, it's pretty high first thing in the morning. And it just goes down steadily all day with two exceptions. After they have their break and their snack in the middle of the morning, they get a banana and a sandwich or something. It goes back up, and it goes back up again after lunch. But otherwise, it's just a steady long-term decline, suggesting that as the judge gets mentally tired, it's just doing the easier thing. So in terms of asking your boss for a raise, you might do better when the boss is depleted, especially if you're prepared to make a scene and argue, and you have charts and arguments and so on. But you're right. If it's going to make a big problem for them, that they have to go and justify it and make a case, then when they're depleted, they won't feel like doing that.
So is another advice would be to just, if this will take some willpower and some effort on your boss's part, bring a snack?
Yes.
Here's a sticker bar.
Yeah.
Right. So it's important to recognize, I guess, for yourself and for the people around you, that if someone's ego depleted, they're going to default to whatever is most convenient, basically.
And at that point, you'd have to kind of extrapolate and make some decisions of what would be easiest for them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. How do you know when you're ego depleted?
Well, that is a bit difficult. It would be easier for us if there were a reliable measure, and if human evolution continues, given the importance of self-control, we may eventually evolve an ability to detect it. But I faced this. We had another study where we wanted people to report on how depleted they felt during the day, and it had to be, when you're interrupting people's days, you have to ask really short, brief questions. So I'm try to remember. I came up with a couple. One is, are things bothering you more than usual? That's one sign. We had 3 questions on how they felt and 3 on what they'd done. Have you made a bunch of difficult decisions recently? Have you made yourself not do what you wanted to do? I probably should go back and look up at exactly what.
So we're trying to figure out, are they ego depleted, and then how are they feeling? Because I was kind of leading towards the idea of emotional lability, realizing that you're overreacting.
Yes. Yeah. In fact, people ask me, do I change my own life based on this research? Which, for me, research is not studying myself. It's for learning about people different from me. But one thing I've changed is I used to, when I started to get sick, I would keep working, because the doctor would say, "Oh, go take it easy, don't work." But I thought, I'm not out in the hot sun digging ditches. I'm just sitting at a desk at a computer, so I could still work. But I stopped doing that. And in fact, now we look for the early signal that something happens and seems to bother me more than usual. So several of us do this, and
Right.
okay, that's a bad thing. Somebody sent a nasty email, but it shouldn't upset me that much. Why am I so overwrought about it? And that's a sign that you're not having as much glucose, because the immune system is already coming into action. The immune system uses a lot of glucose, but very unevenly. So if you're not exposed to any germs, your immune system is fine and you have all the glucose for what you want. But you start to get sick, the immune system wants to fight it off. So it's an early warning sign if you overreact, if something bothers you more than it should. And so what I do is then I just try to stop working altogether, go lie down in bed, try to spend 24 hours just sleeping, watching TV, reading a novel. Often you can tell when you lie down in bed. Usually is a big nothing feeling for me to lie down in bed, but in this state, you lie down and it feels so good. The way your body reacts, you know the feeling? And it just,
Yeah, well,
oh,
with
that's
three
just
little
wonderful.
kids, that's how I always feel.
Oh, okay. Well, you're lucky. But that's, again, a sign that your body likes this. It wants
Right.
to have all the glucose to fight its battle against the germs. And so would assume you just don't use your muscles, don't use your brain, just lie in bed, go to sleep if you can. And doing it this way, I find I'm often able to not get sick, which is more efficient in the long run anyway. I used to
Yeah.
make myself keep working, and I'd
Right.
plow ahead and I'd be sick for a week or two, and then I'd go back and the work I did wasn't any good anyway.
Yeah, it's a
But
really good
if
point.
you just take 36 hours, I mean, some people can't do this. You're scheduled to do surgery on somebody or you're giving a lecture or whatever, you
Sure.
got to do that. But if you can, withdraw from everything, stay in bed, let your system fight it off, and then you don't get sick, and it's so much nicer. So the overreacting is one sign that you're depleted. It feels difficult to make up your mind about things. That would be another. You're more difficult than usual to make a decision.
Yeah, the studies on the kids who were studying for exams and the ones that were procrastinating, so they
Yeah.
ended up with a lot of stress towards the end. Those were really, I mean, they really rang true when you think of your own experience in
Yeah.
college and you think of the people around you and yourself. But could you talk about, because I thought the idea that they end up with all of these bad habits and that those should be sort of red flag signs, but of course they're not if you're not aware of them.
Yeah, well, procrastination is fairly common. Lots of people do it, um, and so Diane Tice, my wife, was teaching a course on health psychology, and part of that was getting people's reports of their symptoms every week. How did you feel? And so she's got interested in procrastination. So we gave them one of the standard questionnaire measures to see who are procrastinators and who are not. And then looked at the symptom reports going through all semester, and also then looked at their grades, because some people say, oh, I do my best work under pressure. If I started early, it wouldn't be nearly as good. Well, that's an empty rationalization. That's not true. The procrastinators got lower grades on everything. But the surprising thing was that their health was better. And she wrote these results. Well, look at this. This is an interesting trade-off. The procrastinators have this cost of getting lower grades, but they have this benefit of improved health. And then we talked about it and said, well, yeah, but your health data are only in the early and middle part of the semester. What about at the end of the semester? That's when they would start to get sick, maybe. And she said, yeah, you're right. So we repeated the whole study, only kept the symptom reports coming in all the way through final exams. And sure enough, the procrastinators were again healthier. We replicated all the findings. Were healthier in the middle of the semester, but at the end of the semester, they were sicker. And in fact, they were so much sicker at the end that the net total was worse for their health. So procrastination is self-destructive, lower grades, and poor performance. But it makes sense that early in the semester that, the non-procrastinators are getting started on their term paper and keeping up with the readings, while the procrastinators, it's nice outside, I'll go out, play Frisbee, go for a walk, whatever, have a glass of wine. So sure, they're having a lovely life early in the semester, but they're setting themselves up for illness and failure later on.
And the students that are studying for exams, I imagine it would be amplified for the procrastinators. They're more likely to drink more, too much alcohol, drink a lot of caffeine, go on shopping sprees, not have a tidy room, that kind of stuff. Like it seems like when when there's so much demand on the ego, you can see all these impulsive behaviors as sort of,
Yeah, well,
ways
those generally go with low self-control.
yeah,
They don't necessarily all go together. Some people put their self-control, since it's limited, into one thing rather than another.
right.
And the health correlates. Has that been looked at as to why that is? I mean, there are so many variables here that it probably is hard to determine the causation versus correlation. But the added stress, of course, stress of doing some work may be low but spread out for those that are more regimented, as opposed to the procrastinator. So the stress has an impact on the immune system, but then again, so does depleting some of the glucose that would otherwise be used by the immune system when you are studying, predisposes them to some other symptoms, and then that of course comes really calling for the procrastinators. Are those variables, or there are others?
All those make sense. At this point, we don't have all the answers there. You need more research. I mean, one thing we know is people with good self-control live longer, and that's kind of one of the ultimate measures of health. I think is done often with the big five of conscientiousness, which, as far as I can tell, is mainly self-control. And the quest for psychological traits that produce longer life has, they tried a bunch of things, including intelligence, and I guess intelligent people live a little bit longer, but good self-control really helps. Now, why is that? Well, that needs another study to do it, but if you have good self, you probably take your vitamins, you probably floss your teeth, you probably get enough sleep most times. You don't, you may have a glass of wine, but you don't have 3 bottles. And so all those things could contribute. Again, some of this started with the religion aspect, that religious people live longer than others. And they said, okay, well, why is that? They want to think, well, God is looking out for us or whatever, but it seems like all religions are equally good. So either all gods. Anyway, gods are not a scientific explanation. But it turns out religion supports self-control. Religious people have better self-control than non-religious people. And so that's in there. Now that raises another set of questions. Why is it? What about religion improves your self-control? And there's several possible answers, which last I checked, they're all in play. They could all be true, or there might be something else. But one is, if you're religious, you think God is watching you all the time, and being watched improves self-control. You can be watched by a person or whatever, but we know that. Secondly is the community. Religious people take care of each other and look after each other, so you can't go as far off the rails. I'm living here in Utah, where the Mormons are, and I don't believe that stuff at all, but I really respect and admire their community. They go around and check on each other and find out when they're having problems, and so you can't go too badly too long. So that might help the self-control, and it may even be that you can strengthen willpower, as we found in some of our other studies, that religious exercises, you have to get up on Sunday and dress in your nice clothes or whatever and go to church. The discipline of praying, meditating is a self-control exercise, among its other things. So a lot of religious practices might strengthen the self-control muscle directly. So as I said, we don't know which of those is correct. They all could be correct. They're not exclusive, or conceivably they're all wrong and there's something else at work, but I don't know quite what that would be.
I love the idea of willpower as a muscle, right? Because it functions sort of that way, right? You can use up the energy of a muscle, and you can also strengthen it.
Yes. The muscle analogy has really stayed with me over 20 or 30 years of this research. So the basic depletion effect is like a muscle getting tired after you use it. It seems not to work as well. But also regular exercise makes it stronger, and there are a fair number of studies. I think there are 2 meta-analyses out somebody else did the last few years, showing that yes, if you exercise self-control regularly, you do get better at self-control tasks, even at ones other than what you're practicing. It's a general practice. Right. So One
Yeah,
study, they
there's
had
one
people.
group.
It seems that, sorry, so
No, no, no.
the analogy of the muscle works great also for the other aspect of this that you mentioned, because we know that the muscle adapts in terms of its ability to perform, but it also becomes more efficient. And just like you mentioned, self-control is also about efficiency and setting up the
Yes.
environment.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
that's another aspect that this
There-
analogy works for.
There's even a third one that's more interesting, which I learned later. It just takes me a long time to find all this stuff, but I get there eventually. Is that the feeling of tiredness is a mental construction. It's kind of, I won't say an illusion, but it's not. Well, with the muscles, you start feeling tired long before your muscles can't function anymore. There is a point at which your muscle is so tired it won't work. It won't do the job. But you feel tired long before that. And the people who study muscular exertion in the lab find that even at the end of an experiment, when you're supposedly tired, you've done a bunch of things. If they give you, not, now you need to do one more and press as hard as you can, they can press as hard as they did when they walked into the lab. The feeling of tiredness is sort of a signal to conserve energy. It's not a sign that you're completely exhausted. And very much the same with self-control. People get depleted and show these effects, but if we offer them money to do well on the next task, this is the important one. Oh, suddenly they can suck it up. There is more willpower in there. We give them a third test afterwards, and then they're really depleted. So it's not like it magically gives you more. But again, the brain, I think we evolved to conserve energy, which would make sense if you look at, remember, if human civilization existed for 150,000 years, we were hunter-gatherers for 140,000, basically living outdoors, going around barefoot. If you got a cut on your foot and it got infected, that could kill you unless your immune system can fight it off. So the body is designed to conserve energy more than it needs to.
Yeah.
Modern citizen is well fed, never misses a meal. You're not in danger of starvation, but we evolved under conditions where it wasn't really guaranteed you'd have anything to eat tomorrow, and certainly not protein if tomorrow's hunt didn't yield something. So I think we are designed to conserve more, but it has a positive implication, which is that you have more self-control than you think. When you start feeling like quitting, you really do have more, and you can suck it up and push yourself to do more. There are limits, but a variety of things can enable you to do better. This may even be why the exercise works. You may learn that you have more self-control than you can, because try to reconcile the exercise findings with the glucose findings. It's not that it gives you any more glucose, just because you've been doing self-control exercises, still have the same amount, but your body learns to stop expending it early. And then through training, you can learn maybe to keep going for a while because you'll still be fine. That's just a theory.
Interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, there was something we were talking about before we started recording and talking, was we understand, so you have a certain amount of ego that you can expend, so a certain amount of energy. And we talked about how if you have a lot of choices, you can deplete that energy. What we were wondering is, if you knew that you were going to have, let's say, a podcast or something important that you were going to have to do, and you were given a task before that, would you show the same kind of ego depletion on the sort of more menial task, knowing that I'm going to need my reserves later?
Sort of compartmentalize the
Yeah.
available.
Has anyone ever looked at that?
Yes, and you are good to come up with that. That was very astute. One of my last graduate students did his dissertation on something like that, where you had to answer difficult questions, and later on you were going to have another set for which there would be money paid. And
Yeah,
so
exactly.
did you
Right.
do a lousy job on the early ones after I think you were depleted, decide to conserve the energy for the more important ones later? I mean, to me, you'd think, well, if there are important questions coming up, you want to practice, try hard to do them. But no, it seemed very much the opposite. People did postpone. They did do worse on the practice ones. I think they got 10 cents a piece for the practice ones and $1 a piece for the test ones. So it was enough money to be worth doing it. And there's another interesting twist he found. This is Andrew Van Ash. Another interesting twist he found was it was mainly people with high self-control, trait self-control, who did this, who figured out, oh, I got to conserve my energy. It sort of goes with the rich get richer in terms of self-control. It's the same in those studies. If you don't, where we have people do exercises to strengthen the self-control muscle. Well, if you don't do the exercises, you're not going to get any stronger. But it takes a certain amount of self-control to make yourself do the daily exercises to keep up with it. So yes, nice findings. It hasn't been published. I saw the guy just a couple months ago, and he said, well, the journals wanted a bigger sample of the replication. He said he ran a giant replication of it, and it came out P is 0.06, which is just 0.05 is significant. And then he said he ran a second one, and that also came out at 0.06. So he wasn't sure how he could publish it. It obviously looks like it's really true, but it's not the easiest effect.
It's funny that we'll be talking with Adam Alter, and in his book, he talks about the fetishization of whole numbers. And it's funny, I like P 0.05. Like, of course,
just to make sure that if anyone listening is not aware of it, that the statistical significance is what we're discussing, right? For the study, for it to be relevant, it needs to be less than 0.05.
Right.
Yeah, and that's an arbitrary number, and the critics say, that's silly to make a fetish of that. But you had to do something. Every experiment will produce some difference. So it's a convention. How do we say it's a real difference rather than just by chance? So the chance would give you a result this big less than 1 out of 20 times. If it's that strong, that's what significance means. And then
it just struck me how we do sort of if it's not 0.05 or better, then
it's irrelevant.
Then it's irrelevant. Don't talk about.
That was the culture I grew up in, and I know people are complaining about that, but we don't really have anything better. The results of an experiment are on a continuum, and the question is binary: is there a causal relationship or not?
Right. Right.
So you have to, and this is a common problem in all sorts of walks of life, where you have to take continuous data and make a binary decision, whether you're testing somebody for cancer or you're the inspector at the airport. Is there a bomb in the suitcase or not? You have all sorts of continuous data readings, but you're trying to get at a dichotomous reality. So the significance testing, much deplored and so on, and yes, it has its flaws, but it's the best we can do.
Are there good strategies to prevent ego depletion?
Well, get enough sleep and eat properly. Again, it's the body's energy system, so it does help. We have mixed findings. It's hard to study sleep. The food thing we've shown multiple ways, but sleep is hard. I know 2 big studies that looked at sleep deprivation and came to different conclusions. One, the more negative one, was using soldiers and being aggressive, and I'm not sure we use aggression as a sign of lower self-control, but soldiers in a military context, it might not be for them. So, that found that the sleep didn't really make them more aggressive, being deprived of sleep. But a couple other ones have found that yes, when you haven't had enough sleep, you're more prone to become depleted right away. There's the morning morality effect. This is, again, not my work. Somebody else did it, that people are more moral in the morning because they've rested and their self-control is intact. Again, at the end of the day, they're more vulnerable to temptation and to doing something immoral. And again, there are a couple others. I don't remember them all right now, but sleep looks to be there.
The Zeigarnik Effect was really interesting to me. I had not heard that before. Do you want to describe that?
All right. Well, the story is this is named after this woman, Bluma Zeigarnik, a Polish researcher back in the 1920s. I guess they went to lunch, and the waitress took their orders, didn't write anything down. There was a whole table full of people, and brought them all the correct food, and they were marveling at what a impressive memory she had. And then I guess they went back to the psychology department and said, "Oh, I forgot my hat," and went back and saw the waitress there and said, "Oh yeah, you remember me?" And she had no idea who she was. Who he was. She didn't recognize him. And finally said, "Well, come on, you remembered everything so perfectly with the orders. How come you don't even remember talking to us?" And she said, "Well, once it's done, it's out of my mind. But while it remains unfinished, it's there." And they said, "Well, could this be a general pattern?" And they started doing these tasks. And sure enough, unfulfilled thoughts or unfulfilled tasks prompt thoughts into the mind. They, "Oh, I better go finish that at some point," or I haven't done this," or even, "I left the door open." That will pop into your mind. And there's a long history since, well, almost a century. It doesn't always replicate, but it often replicates. So I'm pretty sure it's a real effect. There are two main theories about why it happens. And it goes into the debate about, does consciousness have causal effects on behavior or not? And the people who are skeptical of consciousness say, "Oh, your consciousness is just kind of your own printout of what's going on in your mind. The unconscious is doing all the work. And so the Zeigarnik Effect is the unconscious is going to take care of finishing the task. It's just sort of reminding you. It's sort of letting you know it happened." And the other explanation, whatever people believe in consciousness, is that, well, the unconscious can't get it done, so it's trying to tell the conscious mind, "Hey, you better go finish that job, or close the door, or do whatever needs to be done." Well, my student Mazzacampo, who was one of the best minds I'd worked with, he came up with the idea that it's actually neither of them. That conscious and unconscious work together. The unconscious can do a lot of the simple work, but it can't do the complex things very well. So an unfinished task, it doesn't know really how to go about getting that done. There's all possible times and places. But if you'd make a very specific plan, then that would take care of it. He borrowed research by Golwitzer, where people have highly specific plans, they work better. So in Golwitzer's studies, for example, there's one on women doing breast cancer examinations for cancer, just checking for lumps. And so some had a general thing, "Oh yeah, you should check your breasts for lumps." And they ended up not doing it very much. But the others say, "Okay, specifically, I'm going to do it tomorrow after my shower." And with a very specific plan, then you get it done. And it studies all kinds of things that really do work better. So Mazzacampo designed this clever study where he took students, this was at Florida State, and think about your biggest exam that's coming up, and it's somewhat stressful and a concern. In a control condition, they thought about a big party that was coming, because Florida State was a party school. Anyway, sure enough, then he measured, did they have intrusive thoughts about studying, which he measured very carefully, like making words out of, ST blank, blank, blank. Is it still or
Study.
stick, or is it study? And sure enough, the people who'd been reminded of the upcoming exam were more likely to have words like study come into there. But for half of them, he had them make a plan for when they're going to study. Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock, I'll get out my textbook and go over everything I underlined. And Wednesday morning, I'm going to review my notes from the lectures, and so on. So very specific. They did not have the Zeigarnik Effect. They did not have these intrusive words. So they had not done any studying. Remember, they were just sitting in the lab. They'd made no progress toward the goal, but the conscious mind made a plan for specifically how to get it done, and that was good enough to satisfy the unconscious, so it doesn't have to keep tugging on your sleeve and saying, hey, we got to get this done. I think it's a profound insight of E.J.'s Mazzacampo's idea, so I could say a profound insight into how conscious and unconscious work together. The conscious deals with the big plans and probabilities and channels them into very specific plans. The unconscious doesn't know how to deal with wide open-ended things, but it knows very specifically, okay, 10 o'clock Tuesday morning, you better have the textbook out. I don't have to bother you on Monday
Right.
about studying, but Tuesday morning, bingo, that's the unconscious will get you going. So that was our Zeigarnik.
I love that. And doing that frees up more energy for other things, right? Because now you can put that aside. That's done.
Yes, probably. Now the unconscious doesn't need as much energy. Again, the unconscious processes aren't as affected by ego depletion. So, if
Well,
you,
right, but the unconscious that's constantly nipping at the conscious to say,
right,
do this, do this, do this, that no longer happens.
Well, there is the getting things done system, and one of its claims to fame and why people like it a lot is because one of the parts of the system is that it creates an inbox for you. Any thought you have that is important to you, just put it in there, and then at the end of the day, you go and you assign it into a certain subfolder where this goes with my family plans, vacation plans, or my business or my research project. But that empties it, and now you have certainty that you won't forget it. It won't be constantly nipping at you, and then you'll be able to actually take care of it and have a specific plan for it.
yes, that is interesting. I mean, that speculates a bit beyond what we know, but it's very plausible. There's all that research about the beneficial effects of meditation. And I think it may be a lot of the kind of thing you were just saying. We have all these thoughts in our minds that we haven't had a chance to digest and sort and put away. Maybe just meditating allows them to come up again and get put into the right box.
That's right.
Again,
That's
that's
interesting.
that's
Yeah,
What are
I
your
like
thoughts on? I'm going to butcher this because I can't recall who is the famous writer who uses this technique. I want to say Stephen King, who says that he doesn't finish a sentence before he puts his work away. So when he comes back the next day, he just continues that sentence
no.
as a way of preventing writer's block, but also letting things percolate. Does that correlate in any way with this, or is it just a separate thing that he uses?
That may be more of a self-control thing. I would like to find out who did this, because I had an interesting discussion about this. I was talking when I was at the Max Planck Institute, and Peter Gollwitzer was there talking about how people do tasks and repeat them and take them up again. My wife was there, and she said it's so hard to write papers as a young professor. It's stressful, and she says it's hard to get myself going. So when I get going, I want to keep going when it's working. I want to keep going as long as I can, and so I will usually just keep going until I come up to something that's just too hard, and then I stop there. And I'll take this up tomorrow. But that means the next day, the first thing you have to do
It's
is
something
the
that's too
really
hard.
hard thing, and so that does it. And I sort of reflected on it, and I said, what I do when I come to the end, I try to stop at an easy place and even make some notes as to what the next couple paragraphs should cover, so you can easily slip right back in
Right.
there. So I think the difference is the emotional hurdle of getting started and getting to work. You don't want to start with something that's really difficult, because then you're dreading it and postponing it and thinking, maybe I should go clean up the kitchen first, or do my email, and then
Yeah.
the time goes by and you don't get to it. So make it easy for yourself to start it. The stopping in the middle of a sentence, that's a little
Yeah.
I actually just took a look, and I think I was wrong. It was Hemingway. I think
Hemingway.
it was a Hemingway's trick. Yeah.
Okay, well, he certainly was a very successful writer, and so yeah, that's
That's interesting.
good. We'll call it the Hemingway effect, the Hemingway technique.
I guess along these lines is the idea, well, maybe there's a correlate with people who clean their rooms, people who have a clear desk, people who have, put away their socks, tend to have more self-control, and they tend to have more energy for other things, right? It actually sort of paradoxically frees you up in some way.
I don't know what the truth is on that, and I have to confess I'm not very good at cleaning up my room and all that sort of stuff. But I always get my work done early. In fact, giving people advice for young researchers, and I said, get in the habit of turning everything in a month before it's due. Your life is so much nicer, so much less stress, and so on. But it takes away from doing all the cleaning up
Yeah.
stuff. I remember I talked to the great social psychologist Daryl Bem one time, and he was doing early things on self-control way back in the 70s. So he said, well, what would be measures that we could ask people about? He was teaching at Stanford. So he said, well, the ones who turned in their assignments on time for my class, and changed their socks every day. Those would be two valid measures of having good self-control. And so he administered them to his people. He said they were negatively correlated at minus 0.6, which is a strong thing for listeners who don't know. He said basically they could do one or the other.
Yeah.
So
Speaking of cluttered desks, and it seems like you're in good company because it reminds me of when Einstein was asked about his cluttered desk, and he said if we are to think of a cluttered desk as a cluttered mind, he says, what are we to think of an empty desk then? So that was a funny comeback.
good. I'll have to remember that one.
Yeah, but I was thinking that there's the explorer. I forgot his name. It was in the book. He explored Africa, and he had all these amazing trips where everyone else all the other Europeans died around him, but he had this amazing self-discipline. And one of the things he always did was he always shaved in the morning.
Yes. Yeah.
And it was like, well, how do you use these vital calories that people are starving to death all around you, but yet you sit there and shave? And I think the idea was, well, you need to set you have to keep your discipline.
Yes.
And that allows you to have more energy for other things. Am I?
Yes, that was my take on it too. That my co-author Tierney was really interested in these explorers, and so he added that point. I just learned about it the same way you did, reading it in.
Yeah. It was kind of fascinating. You do see that with military people or whatever, that by sticking to a discipline.
There's a famous commencement address, I think it was, where make your bed.
Make your bed.
Yes.
Yeah, Admiral something.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
The idea that you get up every morning and you have to make your bed. For one, I think it's not quite the same, but the idea there is
Set the tone
for the day.
Yes.
Discipline and
Yeah,
Right.
the military. My sense is people who spent a long time in the military look down on civilians as undisciplined. Discipline obviously is a big thrust of military life, and it's one of the reasons that it becomes an avenue for people who grow up sort of at the bottom of society to end up, acquiring the traits that contribute to middle class success, and leading to a successful life later on. The military has done a lot of good for troubled young men, and teaching discipline may be a key.
Yeah. I wanted to get to how to replenish the ego, but I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up this one study, because I think that for all the guys out there, this is one that they should be aware of, which was someone asked, I'm not sure who did the study, but they asked, they offered people either $100 today or $150 a year from now, something like that. And basically when men looked at hot women, they chose the $100 today.
Right.
When women looked at hot men, they were fine waiting for the 150. And when both of them looked at really nice cars, they could wait for the 150. But there was something about looking at attractive women that seemed to short circuit guys' ability to, they wanted the short-term payoff rather than looking at the long-term. And I don't know if there's much psychological grounds to mine there, but I thought it was so absurdly interesting, and also something that guys should be aware of because they even looked at functional MRIs, I think, of them, and they saw the blood flow differently.
Okay, I don't remember all the details. It was not one of my studies. I met the guy who did it. His name escapes me right now. But yes, it's in an evolutionary psychology framework that most females have reproduced, most males have not, and the male has to take advantage of every mating opportunity. So looking at attractive pictures of women scantily clad sort of activates the male, got to pursue an opportunity for sex here. And most men know it's not how you look, it's how much money you have. That's a big factor in appealing to women. And so, who cares a year from now? This will be gone. I mean, it's not really logically thinking it through,
Right.
but an attractive woman makes you think, okay, sex now, and for that I need money now.
Yeah.
I don't think they were using real money either, but it was a hypothetical preference.
Mm. Yeah.
It would be very expensive to do.
It would be a very expensive study, right?
Yes, but yes, and women don't show the same psychological weakness, if you will. But for women, the chance to have sex right now is not such a big deal, because well, you remember the Wayne Hatfield study that a woman can ask 2 or 3 people to have sex with her, and she's likely to get a yes almost immediately, whereas a man can ask till he's blue in the face. Uh, and so
And
the
continue to be
opportunities are very different, and the male psyche is much more designed to take advantage and to pounce, and so
Yeah.
that's got to be in the here and now. That's another delay of gratification kind of thing. That's the way you do it with adults. With children, you do the marshmallow test. Can you wait 10 minutes to get a second marshmallow? For the adults, it's would you rather have $1,000 or $100 today or $150 a year from now?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. For ego depletion, if you do find yourself being ego depleted, not having the resources to make decisions the way that you know that you should be able to, you can eat something. We know that, right? You can eat a candy bar, ideally some protein, and let that replenish you. What are some other ways that you could reset? And it just not to throw too much at the same time, but how long does it take to reset on average? Has anyone ever looked at that?
No, the question of how long depletion lasts is an interesting one, and I don't know. So that people are probably depleted to varying degrees. You could make the analogy, as I always do, to physical tiredness. So when your muscles are tired, how long does it take for them to recover? And you need to say, well,
Yeah.
it depends how
depends, right,
tired they
right,
are,
right.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
what else
Yeah.
you're doing with them. So, well, again, it helps to realize that you have more willpower than you think.
Sure.
So you can push yourself to do it. Just you got to realize your mind is looking for shortcuts and the easy way out, and so push
Yeah.
it to think more carefully about the decision. A decision has to be made now, and you're tired, but you've got to come up with an
Right.
answer. I always think in this context of officers in combat who often they only get 2 hours of sleep a night for all week, and so
Yeah.
they're making life and death
But they're still
decisions,
right. Right.
without. So you try to push yourself to be more careful and more thorough. If you know what the patterns are, how decision making goes bad, then you can watch specifically for those.
And it seems to, once again, that analogy of the muscle comes back when if you go to the gym more regularly, you recover quicker.
Yes.
So if you exercise your willpower more, you're more likely to recover quicker.
Yeah.
Right.
Replenish.
Yes. Yeah. What Victorians used to talk about is building character. That really seems to be true. It's kind of the same thing that we're finding in these exercise studies.
Yeah.
So just challenge yourself, whether it's taking a cold shower in the morning or
Posture one was interesting. Just because it seems such a small thing to do. They basically they had, I think, with students, right?
Yes.
Just work on remember to have better posture during the day, and that
Yes.
had carryover. That was surprising.
that was the first exercise study that we did, and we were trying a couple things we didn't know what would work. We told some of them try to make themselves feel better emotionally whenever they felt bad, and that had no value apparently. Possibly because regulating your emotions is a weird indirect thing you can't do as well. But the posture worked. We said, whenever you think of it, sit up straight, stand up straight. And then the test we did in the lab had nothing to do with posture. I forget exactly what we did. But sure enough, the people who had done the posture, and the more often they had done the posture exercise, the better they did on the lab test of self-control.
I would bet that, like with muscles again, the more like if you just do the same biceps exercises all the time, eventually your muscles get used to it and you don't get as much bang for the buck. I would imagine, I don't know if it's ever been looked at, but I would imagine that working on self-control with posture, but also doing different kinds of activities.
Yes.
Cross-training willpower would probably.
Yeah,
That's a good title for a
that's a
book.
good term.
Cross-training willpower.
Cross-training. There's some of the manipulations we've used in the subsequent studies where like using your left hand instead of your right hand to open doors and brush your teeth and drink from a cup and all that. But what exercises self-control is changing. It's overriding the one response. You have a habit of reaching for the doorknob with your right hand, so you have to overcome that and reach with your left hand. After you've done it for 2 weeks and it becomes a habit to reach for the doorknob with your left hand, it's not doing any good anymore in terms of building your willpower. So as you say, the willpower cross-training is essential.
That could be an app. I was surprised. I was really surprised because intuitively I would have guessed from my own life that it was, but I think I was just fooling myself that indulgences, sort of like the milkshake, but even I would have guessed that like 5 minutes of television or 5 minutes of
The little Mardi Gras.
yeah, like a little Mardi Gras in the mind, I would have thought would reset you a little bit, but turns out not at all.
Yeah, we didn't find much of that. The indulgence.
What a shame.
That's what I told Matt. The study would make us popular if it worked.
But by the way, that was a great example. I meant to mention this before. For all the young researchers out there, or older researchers, of seeing you could have easily done what your grad student had said, which is, oh, it didn't work. Okay, next one.
Yeah.
But instead of like taking what's there and pivoting, I mean, it was the same thing with the Viagra pill, right? They were looking for something to help people with heart disease, cardiac problems, and they saw the side effect that became the tens of billions of dollars of.
Oh yeah, I didn't know about that. Huh.
That's how that happened. Yeah, because the researcher like you did had the astuteness to say, okay, well, what we were looking for wasn't there, but let's mine that. There's something interesting there. Let's see what that is.
Yeah, I think that's a real plus and contributes to the fun as well as the success of a research career. Things don't turn out all the way you expected. Occasionally they do, but so we'll follow the data where they actually do lead and be open to new ideas.
I love what you said about I was listening to the Audible on the Willpower. I think it was the Willpower book. Might have been one of the others. But anyway, you said you had all these researchers get together and you're looking at data, and then you realize, oh, it's not quite right. We have to change whatever. I think it was about self-esteem actually. And you said, but that's good, because if you have all these researchers looking at tons of data and no one changes their mind, then you're either really lucky, or you're not really looking correctly, right? Or something went awry.
Yeah, there's always something new and different to be learned. Our theories are way short of reality.
Yeah. Well, listen, it would be a malpractice of us to be talking about willpower and not talk for at least a moment about what most people think of when they think of willpower, which is losing weight.
Okay.
And you say specifically that one of the things you should not think of when you're losing weight is that it has anything to do with willpower, right? But what are some strategies that people can?
No, willpower helps. So people with good self-control.
Where it helps, but that you need the strategies that willpower can get you. That if you just try to go through it saying, I'm just going to diet and I'm just going to use my willpower every day to eat less, then you're destining yourself for failure. Or am I wrong about that? Is that not, did I misconstrue that?
I haven't done any research actually on dieting. We did find that people with good self-control do a little bit better at it. It's not as big an effect as people might think. People with good self-control are more likely to complete the diet. They lose more even though they were lighter to start with. Self-control.
Because they have self-control to begin with.
Right.
So it is helpful. As you know, weight and body shape and so on, there's a strong genetic contribution. So there's some people, they could diet all they want and they're still not going to be thin. But it does it does do some good and does help.
Yeah.
Um,
The,
and
the irony of trying to use your willpower to not eat is that then your glucose drops, and that also that makes it harder to use your
right,
willpower.
yeah,
So,
yeah, that's the yeah. You need to eat to get enough willpower to not eat. Yeah.
Vicious cycle.
Well,
right.
what
Yes.
people do is, again, people with good self-control is they don't rely on the willpower to do it. If you're going to start a diet, you get rid of all the chips and chocolate and other fattening stuff, so that it's not there, so that late at night you're not tempted.
Right.
You start,
That's what I was getting at with the using it more as a strategy builder.
yeah, and you prepare for yourself. You know your willpower fluctuates, so when you have enough of it, you lay the foundation, create the environment where there's nothing fattening to eat here, so I won't eat anything fattening.
Yeah, and to develop strategies around that, right, as well. Like for example, you had a cool idea, which is to brush your teeth right after dinner, for example, which just increases the barrier to wanting to have snacks later.
All right, yes, yeah, that's another. I don't have to brush my teeth again. Makes it seem more of a hassle.
Yeah, yeah. There was one study that I have to mention because it's so crazy, but it's so telling. They had it's in your book. They had a chicken salad and a Pepsi. Do you know this one? Do you remember this one? A chicken salad and a Pepsi, and you have to guess the number of calories. And then they have a chicken salad and a Pepsi and trans fat-free crackers. And people guess that when you have the trans fat-free crackers in addition to the other two, that there's less overall calories.
All right,
And they
okay.
describe it as the health halo effect.
Yes. There are a bunch of findings like that people have simple and wrong ideas about where the calories are. And of course, now there's the argument that was it the calories or is it the carbohydrates, the fat molecules or the fat storing molecules. So I don't know all that stuff, but
Yeah.
yes, there is the health halo.
Well, I can't recommend your books enough because
And we only touched on willpower and self-control, and then there are so many
There's so
other
much more
topics
in there,
that
yeah.
you
Yeah.
that you write about, and they're so useful and so mind-boggling in some ways.
Yeah.
So it's great. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much,
Okay,
Roy,
well,
for
thank you.
taking the time. This was great. Maybe we could. There's so many more things that we've got pages and pages here, but I think we'll save that for another time. Maybe we can have you back sometime.
We'll
Okay.
avoid ego depletion right now.
Yeah,
Yes.
we
Right, yeah. No, this is fun for me. I'd be glad to talk again. There are plenty more things to talk about.
Friends, thank you for your attention. We hope you've enjoyed the conversation. If you find value, please remember to hit the like button to help us with our YouTube algorithm. Consider subscribing to the channel and turn on the notifications so you can stay up to date with everything going on with the channel. And please leave us a comment, let us know what you thought about the show and also what you'd like to hear about in the future.